Welcome to Talking Business, a podcast produced in Melbourne, Australia. The podcast is available on the Acast site, my own website, the Apple Podcast Store, or wherever you go to get your podcasts. Or you can get it at the Business Acumen website at www.businessacumen.biz. For the most exclusive access to leading economists and business leaders from around the world, subscribe to Talking Business from our website, leongettler.com. I am Leon Gettler. My job is to review and monitor the week's news in business, finance and economics. I bring it all to you every week. This is episode number 8 in our series for 2025, and today's date is Friday, March the 28th. First, I'll be talking to Rocky Lavalni, who serves as Chief Profitability Advisor for business owners and is the founder of Profit Comes First. He teaches his clients how to ensure they get paid and they make a profit a priority. And I'll be talking to independent economist Nicholas Gruen about the impact of Trump's tariffs on global supply chains and the loss of trust in the US. But first, let's talk to Rocky Lavalni.
Well, Rocky, tell us about Profit First.
So Profit First is a book by Mike Michalowicz. He's a serial entrepreneur. He writes a ton of books, all designed to help business owners to have a growing and more profitable business. And it was kind of the lessons he learned through his downtime, so to speak, and going through the struggles. And he's like, why is this so hard? And he realized that we were given the wrong equation for profit. And so that's what he introduces in the book.
So tell us about the concept as it applies to business.
So everyone is told by their accountant that it's sales minus expenses equals profit. So in that case, profit's a leftover. It's an afterthought. I don't think people went into business to have profit be an afterthought, right? And so he said, let's fix the equation. It's sales minus profit equals expenses. And what it does is it constrains your spending, because more often than not, business owners spend too much. That's just the reality of the situation. And by looking at it differently, they are forced to constrain themselves.
So it's a whole change in the equation.
It's a whole change in the equation. It's a whole change in mindset. It's a whole change in how you look at things.
So sales minus profit equals expenses.
Yeah.
And that would actually force businesses to actually say, hey, what am I spending this on?
Well, let's face it. I mean, if you're a business owner, so I want to sit in the business owner seat now, and I'm going to invest in a business. Do I not expect a return on my investment? You do. But yet, how many business owners actually track their investments and track the return on their investment in the business that they own? They wouldn't put up with this with somebody else.
Indeed. And I actually came across this myself because I actually got rid of 2 services or 3 and I actually sat down and analyzed it as a business owner. And I thought, hey, I'm not getting any ROI on this.
Yeah.
So I got rid of those services.
And I think we need to do that on a regular basis, to constantly be looking, where are the leaks in my business? It's real easy. I mean, it's not real easy, but for a lot of people, it is real easy to drive revenue. What's really hard is to keep it. And it's a very different skill set. And it's not one that's talked about.
And this would force businesses constantly to assess their ROI on everything they spend their money on.
Well, it does. Because of the way that the system works, you're getting early warning signals that there's not enough cash in your expense account. And because of that, you have to change the way you're doing business. You have to think twice about what you're doing. And it kind of forces you to be more cognizant. Too often, business owners don't know till much, much later that they ran out of cash until it's too late. This system creates early warning systems to tell you, oh, you're spending your profit. Oh, you're spending your owner's pay. Oh, you spent the tax account. And so it prevents a lot of those sleepless nights and the freakouts.
Okay, so how are businesses taking to this?
There are almost 1 million businesses that use it. So I'm assuming that it is going well for those who are actually willing to take action and do something, which is the second problem, is business owners don't always take action. And that's probably the bigger problem. So if they do, and if they follow it, they do well. Like when I look at my clients who have the most cash tend to be the ones that follow the system and do it well. And that's not usually a conversation that happens often in the business world, right? Oh, I've got so much cash. What am I supposed to do with this?
Right. Okay.
That's what my business owners say to me if they follow it and it goes well.
So how many clients do you have?
I only have a handful. I have a very small niche practice, but there are, like I said, probably close to 1 million businesses using the system, and many of them have had tremendous success. It's changed the way that they look at their business finances and their relationship with business finances.
So you're based where, in New York?
I'm in Pennsylvania, so
So-
close enough to New York.
So your clients are all over the States?
My clients are all over the States. Occasionally, we'll have somebody in Canada or Europe. As long as they match up relatively well with time zones, it works fine. That's the limiting factor. It's a big time zone issue.
Okay. So, but if you didn't have that time zone issue, you'd look at exploring businesses in Australia?
Yes. And there are people who do what I do in Australia. There are other profit first professionals probably in Australia that you can find to be able to do that. And the other thing is we have a profit blueprint that teaches everything. So if somebody wanted to kind of do it themselves with a lot of back email support and so forth, we could help them with that for a smaller business that was more do it yourself.
So do you have a website?
We do. It's called profitcomesfirst.com.
So if people need to get that, they just go to that.
They go to that, or, if they want to learn, we share what we do with our clients on our podcast, which is called Profit Answer Man. So we're always sharing how to have a more profitable and growing business. We don't hold anything back. There's no secret sauce hidden away, none of that stuff. Everything we do is common business sense. Not everybody wants to do it themselves. Some people want it done for them. And so for those, we have a do it, done for you program. If you just want to buy the book or listen to the book or just Google Profit First, and there's tons of information out there that you can kind of implement on your own if you choose to. And that's perfectly fine.
It's quite a revelation for businesses, isn't it?
It is. It is a game changer because let's face it, how often do we really talk about the bottom line? Everyone talks about what their revenue is. Oh, I had this and I had that. Nobody talks about how much they take home. And I don't know what your business owners there are like, but here, there's a lot of business owners who are not getting paid a reasonable wage. Like if you look at their hourly salary and you hired somebody at that rate, you'd be in violation of labor laws. It's so low, right? So that's not fair. Business owners need to pay themselves an appropriate salary for the work they do. And the business itself is supposed to be profitable. So they should be getting both of those.
Well, every business I know puts in extraordinary amounts of work and hours.
And that's okay, but you need to be compensated for it.
Right. And a lot of business owners I know start work at about 6 or 7 a.m. and it's still going at night.
Well, are they getting paid 6 into 7 figures that they take home? Because if they're not, then there's a problem.
So that's the issue business owners need to look at is how much am I getting?
That's correct. They need to know how much they're getting, whether or not their business is profitable. And then, profit first is what we call step number 1. What we do for our clients is steps 2 through 10. We go through and we look at the entire business from beginning to end to say, what does your lead flow look like? How many of your leads convert? How much is it costing you for marketing to get those leads? Is that a good number? Is that a thumbs up? Is it a thumbs down? What do we need to do to improve the sales process? What's your retention rate? What's your average sale? All of that helps to drive revenue. Then our second bucket is, okay, you drove all this revenue. Now, what's it cost you to run your business? So looking at all the operational costs, the efficiency, the everything that's going on there. And so that's the second bucket. And then the last bucket is the cash bucket, because your profit and loss can say you're profitable and you have no cash. And it's because it's tied up in accounts receivable, or it's tied up in inventory, or you have a lot of debt, or something else is going on in the business, because cash flow doesn't equal profit. Profit's a fictitious number that your accountant came up with. It doesn't equal cash in the bank. And so we look at the entire process completely to help business owners have more cash and to work less too. Because why are you working from 6 till whenever you said? That's too much.
Well, Rocky, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you very much for your time.
You are most welcome.
And now let's talk to independent economist Nicholas Gruen.
Well, Nicholas, you have a view about the tariffs being introduced by President Trump. What's your view?
Well, my view is that being a bully doesn't work in the short term if you're small, but it does work in the short term if you're large. That's true militarily, and it's true in terms of trade wars, and that's our problem. And in a sense, economists are not being our friend, because economists are so aghast at the idea of imposing tariffs that they've ignored something in their own corpus, in their own discipline, which is called the optimal tariff argument. And it goes like this: if you're a large country and you impose tariffs, then you recall how Donald Trump says foreigners will pay the tariffs. Well, that's mostly wrong, but economists are telling you that it's totally wrong. And it's not totally wrong, it's slightly right. And what will happen is that because a tariff is being imposed, the American exports will become more scarce in Canada and Mexico and in the places that he's imposing tariffs. And the American appetite for imports will become lower. And both of those things will shift prices somewhat towards in America's benefit in the short run. And at least in a textbook, that's what economists should be saying. It's not really what they're saying. And in that sense, we need to get our heads around what a bad situation this is, because I'm not arguing that this was a sensible thing for Donald Trump to have done. It's a disastrous thing for Donald Trump to have done, but it will take time for many of its worst features to show.
The view is that the tariffs are at some level inflation.
That's not really true, because tariffs raise revenue. So in the first instance, again, this is just a classic, economists, they're sort of having both ends of this. Why didn't economists tell us that the GST was going to be inflationary? It was inflationary, but lots of compensating changes were made. So you can impose tariffs in a way that is inflationary, or you can impose tariffs in a way that is not inflationary. And it is not inflationary to impose tariffs if you lower taxes elsewhere, and tariffs will give you the revenue to do most of that. It's very marginally inflationary. Now, one thing we haven't addressed is some of the short-term supply chain issues, and that's where the textbook doesn't help us. And it's true that there will be basic chaos in supply chains. So that's the one short-term problem. And of course, there are huge long-term problems with the tariff.
May I say that one of the big long-term problems is the lack of trust?
Exactly. Why would you sign an agreement with the United States ever again? We have the more responsible people in our parliament asking those questions about AUKUS, for instance, which always looked incredibly dodgy from my point of view. But now, if you're not part of the party duopoly, if you're not in the Liberal Party or the Labor Party and being kept into line, it's just bleedingly obvious that you're basically Neville Chamberlain with a piece of paper after this.
The issue is that, Trump is talking about tariffs on Europe, and America has military bases in Germany.
Yeah.
And, Germany could charge them rent.
Well, they won't charge them rent because Germany wants them to stay there and they want to go home. So this is a kind of monumental rearrangement of the world. Again, in principle, I mean, don't get me wrong. I think Donald Trump is a 90-something% gold-plated disaster for the world. Some of his biggest ideas I happen to agree with, but I don't agree with chaos, and I don't agree with psychopathy and criminality, which is essentially what we have on our hands. But the idea of saying to the Europeans, you have got to get your act together, you've got to defend yourself. It's absurd for an economy the size of America to be defended by the Americans. That's all entirely correct, in my view. So this could have been, even in its chaotic way, it could have been done quite a bit of good. I think it's just utterly catastrophic. And anyway, I'm now sort of going well beyond the tariff analysis that we've done.
But the issue does come down to trust.
Of course it does. Of course it does. And international law is about trust, and it's a funny game, international law, because you don't I mean, we pretend that we've got international courts, but the Americans haven't signed anything much to subject themselves to the court's jurisdiction, and even if they had, they can walk away. So, we are shown how much law entangles itself into modern, civilized, high-skill cooperation, competition, and interaction. And if you want to tear all that up, it's chaos.
The fundamental issue is you're actually tearing away 85 years of cooperation.
That's one of the things you're doing. And here's a tip for you, Leon. Expect Australia to be the last to get the memo. We seem to have this throughout my life. I've just watched on in kind of amazement. We have this idea that if we're nice enough to the Americans, then when push comes to shove, they'll be nice to us. Well, yes, it's nice to be, I'm perfectly happy to be chummy with the Americans. I'm happy-ish to be in an alliance with the Americans. And it shouldn't be a credulous alliance. It should be an alliance based on mutual interest and a mutual understanding that countries will act in their own interests, and particularly they'll act in their own interests when push comes to shove. And Australia, it seems, is going to be the last country in the world to get that memo. The New Zealanders, in their own way, have made a decision that that they're prepared to offend the Americans. They're so far so good. Who knows? Who knows? These are very imponderable questions, but our position is maximizing credulousness.
Well, the issue is we're solidly behind AUKUS, which is supposed to protect us against China, but we don't know what Donald Trump's relationship will be with Xi Jinping further down the track. And if the US has some alliance with China, where does that leave AUKUS?
Well, AUKUS seems to be about helping the Americans attack China. I'm a signed-on fan of what Sam Roggeveen has christened the Echidna strategy, and that might involve, say, 20 not necessarily nuclear-powered subs surrounding Australia, relying on the Russian defense, the defense that kept Moscow safe from both Napoleon and Hitler, it's a hell of a long way. And we can do you a lot of damage by the time you get to enjoy anything here. And the fact that I think it is the case that Canberra is further from Beijing than Berlin is. We are a long way away from China, and why we want to build the capacity to lob a few apparently non-nuclear missiles into China from a few subs, which we may or may not get. I mean, it's really, just to say it is to be amazed, is to have one's mouth ajar, wondering what the hell this usually sanest of countries, Australia, thinks it's doing in this particular regard.
And the massive costs that have gone into AUKUS.
Don't even start me.
Right. Okay. So basically, you're saying the short-term issues with the tariffs won't be that bad for the US.
There was a thing that Crikey published a few days ago, which I put in my newsletter, and we did a sort of a Economics 101 analysis of the phenomenon that I spoke to you about, which is a large country imposes tariffs, and it gets itself somewhat better terms of trade. If you ignore all other reactions, that produces a net positive for the United States, and we showed that in our modelling. I then said it's the long term you have to worry about. I have to clarify that a bit. I did a little in the piece, which I did with Gene Tunney, by the way, which wasn't covered earlier on in Crikey, and that is that we basically said the main costs arrive in the long term and they're much larger than the gains. And I stick to that, but there is one loss which comes in the short term, and that is the damage to supply chains. And that's kind of chaos. But the Americans will easily... The Americans are in... Would you rather be America in that position or Canada? Because America will just... rearrange its investment to avoid the tariff. That may take 5 or 10 years, and Canada is in a terrible state. So that issue taken into account, and Trump may back off. There's some sign he will, but then he'll do it again. And obviously, you're not going to invest in making Canadian auto parts in these kinds of circumstances, and maybe not even after Trump, because this has naturalized this sort of thing. It's legitimated this sort of behavior. Funnily enough, I used to use the example of Canada. You may know, Leon, I've done a lot of thinking about the car industry in Australia and was involved. It was sort of my first entry into Australian policy economics, working for John Button when we were working on the Button Plan. And what jumped out was that Canada and Australia both had a local content plan, which completely buggered up both industries. But in 1964, right at the beginning in Canada, they went with what I think called the Bladen Plan. And the Bladen Plan said that you could count exports to America as local content. And that meant that the Canadian local content plan didn't do harm. It basically generated a lot of economies of scale, and intra-industry trade could flow freely in North America. And Canada didn't have one of those strangled automotive industries that we had and eventually collapsed in Australia. So these issues are very important, and they need to be thought about thoughtfully. We didn't do it here very well. They did in North America, and that's now being torn to pieces.
One long-term issue is complete loss of trust.
Yes.
Why would anyone do a deal with America
on
again?
any issue? So that goes from trade to defence to anything.
Yeah. The other issue too is this supply chain issue. What we found with COVID during the supply chain issues was that it was actually inflationary.
Yes. But remember here, all that happens, the one smart thing, and who knows, maybe Donald Trump, noticing that this is an intelligent thing to do, will change it. But the one smart thing is that these are just tariffs. They're not quantitative restrictions. So what will happen is that in the short term, these firms have no choice. They will simply pay the tariff. They will change their prices somewhat so that the foreigners will pay some of the tariff, and the actual flow of goods won't be disrupted all that much. So the costs will be borne largely on balance sheets. Try that in the Republican Party.
Right. Okay. So,
a profit and loss, and then on balance sheets.
Well, we'll watch and see what happens.
Yeah. Terrible times.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nicholas. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, Leon.
So what's happening in the news? Well, in Labor's re-election pitch, Treasurer Jim Chalmers' fourth budget sees the nation's book back in the red, with $17 billion worth of tax cuts and efforts to Trump-proof the Australian economy. With Prime Minister Anthony Albanese on the verge of calling the 2025 poll date, the back-to-back surpluses of the previous years have become a $27.6 billion deficit. There is no radical reform in the budget papers, nor an increase to job seeker unemployment support. The cost of living centrepiece is getting Australians earning more and keeping more, Chalmers said, with top-up tax cuts. The average tax cuts is $50 a week, the Treasurer said, although that figure is when it is combined with existing tax cuts. We know there is an appetite for more tax relief. We understand that. We provide tax relief when we can afford to do that, but we are operating in the context of some pretty fiscal substantial restraints. There's a pledge to cut the 16% tax rate for those Australians earning over $18,200 to 15% next year and 14% the year after. The tax cuts announced in the budget are over 2 years from the next financial years. This is the second round of tax cuts after the rejigged Morrison-era Stage 3 tax cuts that began last July. Every Australian will receive a cut of up to $268 from July the 26th. After that, the average worker earning $79,000 per annum will give $50 a week in new tax relief, or $536 extra a year. We acknowledge that these tax cuts in isolation are modest, but they are meaningful in combination, Sharma said. There will be a considerable pressure on the coalition to support the tax cuts, while they're attacking what they say is Labor's wasteful spending. The other budget surprise is a move to abolish non-compete clauses for millions of workers. The budget states that the contract clauses are holding too many Australians back from switching to better, higher-paying jobs. More than 3 million Australians are captured by the clauses, and the Productivity Commission estimates the move could unlock $5 billion through increased productivity and other measures. The budget themes for Labor are very similar to last year: cost of living relief, education funding, strengthening Medicare, building more homes, and a future made in Australia. However, Opposition Treasury spokesman Angus Taylor on Tuesday night left the door open for the coalition to announce its own tax cuts before the coming federal election, at a time when living standards have suffered the biggest collapse on record and when the security environment is the most dangerous since the Second World War. Labor's budget has failed to deal with the economic and national security challenges our country faces, he said. The coalition will not support these tax changes that do nothing to address the collapse in living standards under Labor. And the 2025-26 budget deficit is now forecast to come in at $42.1 billion, which is a slight improvement on what forecasts suggested at last year's budget handed down in May. But the subsequent deficits going out to 2028-29 are now much larger than previously estimated. Some of that deterioration is linked to the impact of the government's signature budget measure, tax cuts next year and the year after. The budget papers show the new tax cuts are estimated to decrease receipts by $17.1 billion over 5 years. The Labor government has allowed its deficit and debts to rise to deliver what it has described as responsible relief. Another budget metric that regularly draws political scrutiny, net debt, has also deteriorated, with the level now rising to $768.2 billion by 2028-29. By comparison, the net debt figure never surpassed $700 billion, according to forecasts made last May. The coalition has argued the level of net debt, when measured against the country's gross domestic product, should not be allowed to surpass 23.9% of GDP. While the Labor budget projections don't reach that number, they do creep towards it, with the ratio expected to hit 23.1% by 2028-29. And with the jaws of defeat looming wide for Labor, it's created a budget with a chance to cut through at the kitchen table. In the context of a cost of living crisis, this budget is firm in ignoring the big picture. Instead, it points to the electricity bill pinned to your fridge and then opens a banking app on your phone. It is a budget deliberately injecting itself into the day-to-day conversations households have about income and spending. It's a plan to help with the cost of living, said Treasurer Jim Chalmers at the very top of this budget speech. Certainly there's a little in there to distract from this. The budget will spend $1.8 billion in reducing electricity bills and an extra $17 billion on reducing tax bills. That supposedly means the median household will pay $150 less on their energy bill, and the average worker will get $536 more on their pay packets. Not bad, quite nice even. While the budget does not engage in profligacy, it barely glances in the direction of national vision or a big picture fiscal strategy. It's simply not about that. We're cracking down on supermarkets, said the Treasurer in his budget speech. That's a strong line, backed by some moderate policy announcements, such as more than $38 million for the competition watchdog to do a bit more. Even if it means a little in practical terms, it nevertheless hints the government is placing the concerns of Middle Australia ahead of those of a chairman's lounge. The electoral motivation is so plain as to inspire admiration. Indeed, this is a classic democratic pattern. You start your term with the big picture stuff, try to set policy that will last 100 years, aim for the stars. The Albanese government